everyone, welcome to Brown Girls Happy Hour, where two brown girls make cocktails inspired by and dedicated to amazing women. Today, we are going to make a cocktail dedicated to Joan Didion, and I think we'll wait for Daman to join. Hi, Daman.
Hi.
And we also have a special guest today who is the host of your favorite book podcast, Malvika. She's going to be joining. Yes. Hi,
Hello.
Malvika.
Hey, Malvika.
Hi.
Okay,
How are you
let's
doing today?
Doing great. Happy to be here.
Thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure. Always excuse for a happy hour.
Yes.
yes.
Yeah, before that, Malvika, why don't you tell us a little bit about, yourself, your podcast, and, before we are too drunk, let's do that right now.
Sure, absolutely. So, hello everyone. My name is Malvika. I am the host of Your Favorite Book, which is a new podcast I started late last year. Basically, the whole goal is talking to guests every week about their all-time favorite book or a book they're really passionate about, sharing my own thoughts on it and bouncing that back and forth and seeing what we can learn from other people's literary taste and just, broadening my own horizons. And so it's been a great endeavor. Dum and I know I had you on as a guest, and that was a great experience. And so I'm really happy to be on Brown Girls Happy Hour today.
You're welcome. And I had great fun talking to you on your podcast too. I think it's a great idea to just, like we do on Brown Girls Read Pod, right? Just read books and talk to people who like to read books.
Yeah, that's my favorite thing to do as well.
So let's make the cocktail now.
Let's
Yes.
do it.
Okay. So get your old-fashioned glasses
So
or
let me tell
anything
you,
similar you have. Like it's nothing strict.
I don't drink a lot of cocktails, so here's a wine glass.
That will do. I have this, so this is a
There
Yeah,
big
we go.
Kathy's trademark mason jar.
yeah.
So have some add some ice into it. It says around half filled, so I think it's close.
Will do.
And this is a bourbon-based drink. It's very close to a Manhattan, I believe. So 2 shots of bourbon,
I
and
left
then
my, okay. So 2 shots of bourbon, you said.
yes.
All right. Let's get that.
And next we have vermouth. I have vermouth, but if you don't have, I think I've replaced it with red wine in the past, so you can easily do that. And the recipe also calls for bitters. It says Angostura bitters. I don't have those. I have something called orange bitter, so I'm just going to use that. It says just a dash, so I don't think it's a very important ingredient if you don't have it. So yeah, just a little bit.
I'm replacing it with Cointreau, so
Yeah, I think it's going to be close to mine because orange flavor.
yeah.
And it also asks for a cherry as a garnish. I don't have a cherry. What I have is a frozen raspberry. So
Nice.
I know it doesn't taste similar, but it looks similar. So there goes. And once you have everything in, just stir with like a spoon or something, and your drink is ready. Pretty legit, like similar to Manhattans I've had in bars. So I'm excited to try this. All
Wow.
right, ladies, cheers.
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 Oh, that's wrong.
I liked it. It's my kind of drink, I think.
It's strong.
Yeah. I wish I
I
had a
really like old fashioned and Manhattans.
Mhm.
So I think this is really good. I don't have to spend money on Manhattans anymore.
It's funny at our wedding. My husband and I got married last year, and at our wedding, the venue had like signature drinks that they would choose for the bride and the groom. And my parents chose these drinks because they planned a lot of the wedding. And his drink was a Manhattan, and so I was like, okay, I've heard of Manhattans. And then turns out we were so busy at the wedding, we didn't even get a chance to try these drinks. So everyone at our wedding was drinking Manhattans, and this is my first one.
Yeah, weddings are usually sad for the people who are getting married because
yeah.
they don't get to try the food and like drinks, whatever they have spent so much time planning and thinking
Right?
about. It's
Yeah.
just that.
Yeah.
Yes.
So this cocktail is dedicated to Joan Didion. Let's talk about her a little bit. Have you read any of her books? Because I haven't.
I haven't, but this year I want to read her book, A Year of Magical Thinking. It's been on my list for a while. And when the New Year's kicked in, I was like, this year I'm going to get magical thinking. Yes, that's the one.
Wow. What is it about?
So, this is basically the memoir that Joan Didion wrote upon the death of her husband, which occurred very suddenly. And along with that, she was dealing with a double grief with her daughter, who had undergone a serious accident. So she was mourning both of these people and dealing with their two separate health crises in some way, as well as trying to find herself in the midst of all that grief. And this is the only book of hers I've read by. I know she's written a lot of fiction as well, which I really want to get to, but my younger sister actually had to read this for school and she recommended it to me. So all these tabs are actually hers. She's a big like tabber and annotator. I don't typically do that with my books, but I really enjoyed it. And I think it's a really great memoir.
Was she your guest on the podcast?
My sister, yes, my sister has been a guest on my podcast. She was, I think, my third or second episode, and she was very obliging, which was nice.
Yeah, I can't expect that from sisters.
Yeah. So tell us about your podcast a little bit. I'm sort of excited to know, mainly because Daman has been as a guest on your show. So what inspired you, or how did you come up with the idea?
Yeah, so basically, I was really bored during 2020, like a lot of other people, looking for sort of something constructive to do to fill my time. And I was thinking, I had toyed with the idea of a YouTube channel for a while, but I don't usually like being on camera. So this is a new thing for me, being on camera. So I was like, okay, what else can I do? And I found that a podcast was a really cool way of getting that across. And then I was thinking, okay, what's my topic? I knew it had to be about books. It's just what I love most in the world. And then the idea for a favorite book, it just sort of came to me because I'm very passionate about my favorites, and I know everybody's got at least one. And so it was just a fun little project, and it allows for like all types of guests to come up on the show because even if you don't read a lot, you've probably got one book you really love, and so it appeals to all sorts of people.
What has been the most interesting discussion on your podcast, you think?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I think my most recent episode that I recorded with an author named Joan Thomas, she and I talked about A Visit from the Goon Squad by Jennifer Egan. And so almost all of the books on the show have been new to me. I hadn't read them before, but this one I had. And when I read it, I hated that book. I like really hated it. And I was like, oh no, I have to read it again. But it was really nice to go back and read a book, find things that worked for me this time and didn't work for me before, and like talk those out with the guest who, she being a writer herself, we were really able to get in there and analyze what worked and didn't work. And so it was really enlightening for me as a reader.
Yeah, I think when you're discussing books with someone, it sort of like opens up your mind a little bit more, because then it's like you're seeing that book from the other person's perspective. So even if you don't like that book, you're like, oh wow, I didn't think of that. Yeah,
Exactly. We all have our different life experiences and things like that that bring, no reader reads the same book. Like everybody reads a book differently. And
yeah.
so that's what makes it interesting.
What is your favorite book?
So I've always said for the longest time, my favorite book is East of Eden by John Steinbeck. It's a weird book to have as a favorite because I've really only read it once, and it was over 10 years ago at this point. And so I was in high school, and it's a long book. It's almost 700 pages long. And so I often think about going back and rereading it. But like part of me is wondering, like, if I reread it, will I like it the same amount? Or now that I'm older, will I be judging it more harshly? And so I intend to reread it again and get more of a perspective. I still think I'll love it, but I'll probably be more critical on it the second time around.
Also very different second time around. I think there are two books I felt about. Like one was A Thousand Splendid Suns. We did a podcast episode on. I read it about 5 or 6 years ago when it came around the first time, and the second time I read for the podcast, it was so different. I feel like it was a totally different experience, even for a fictional book. And then for Big Magic, which is my all-time favorite book, I think the second time I read it, I realized, oh, there's so much more in it, which I don't remember from the first time. I love going back to my favorite books.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so satisfying.
Yeah, I think it also happens so because more so with fiction, I guess, right? Because my favorite book is Paths of Glory by Jeffrey Archer, and that was actually gifted to me by someone when I was a teenager girl, and I was really into books. And this guy who really liked me, he gifted it to me, and then I loved that book so much. But now I'm thinking if I go back and read it again, I still have that copy. But if I read it again, I don't know if I like it because I've outgrown, all of those situations and scenarios. So
Some books are
maybe
definitely age
yeah,
dependent. I believe, like young adult. I feel like I stopped relating to a lot of that now.
right. Yeah.
Yeah, I've become a lot more picky. I've been trying to read more young adult books, and I will say I'm more impressed with young adult books written now than I was with the ones written when I was that age. I think now the genre has become more diverse and you get a lot more interesting stories that talk about more experiences. But in a lot of ways, yeah, like you've outgrown some of those conflicts and things like that.
I think representation, like you said, is one thing that I really admire in now, like current young adult. It was missing when we were growing up.
For
But
sure.
still like the experiences sometimes feel like, oh, it's not a big deal. Why are they making such a big deal out of it?
Yeah.
Right? Like, who cares if you go to the dance with so and so? I've like been there, done
That's
that.
a
Yeah.
major point in most of those, like, a dance in school that's coming up.
Question that we have is what is your favorite cocktail?
My favorite cocktail. Ooh, that's a good question. So, I have a specific. So when I went on vacation to Washington D.C., I went to this bar and they served like these fancy mimosas. So I really like mimosas. I like a brunch cocktail. I think that's really fun. And I'm thinking about this specific one, not because it was so delicious, but they played it. They put it in these like really artful looking glasses with all the little fringe and flowers, and it was beautiful. And then right next to us, when we were having brunch, there was a little girl who was crying because she wanted the same drink.
Oh,
And so the waiters were really nice. They just gave her orange juice in the same fancy cup, and she was very happy. But I always have fond memories when I think of that specific mimosa. But in general, yeah, I like a good brunch cocktail.
All right, then, Malvika, what's next on your podcast then? What are you reading right now?
Oh gosh, right now I'm actually rereading some classics for the podcast, which I was excited about. So I just finished Catcher in the Rye, and I'm rereading The Great Gatsby, which is really great, returning to these books that I hadn't read since I was younger.
I've
And
been scared to go back to Gatsby.
Gatsby's interesting. So I'm talking about Gatsby this week actually, and so I it's been interesting going back to. And my husband right now is also reading Gatsby, but for the first time, he had never read The Great Gatsby before, which I'm surprised. I'm like, you went to school in the U.S. Like, how did you not read The Great Gatsby? But he didn't. And he's pointing out things that I really didn't notice, like things that you weren't really explicitly taught in schools. Like he's the first one to point out there's a lot of racism in this book, which like we know, but like it wasn't one of those things they really taught about the books in schools. It was more focused on look at all the colors and the symbols and things like that, but they didn't focus on like socio sociological commentary really as much.
Interesting. I have to go back now because I
yeah,
don't
I have to
know any of
reread
that.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, there's just a lot of like covert racism in there. It's pretty overt for our audience, but then you remember it's par for the course for 100 years ago. So
All right. Thank you, Malvika, so much for joining us today. This was great fun. And I hope you liked the cocktail.
it's pretty good. It's strong. I'm gonna need a little time with it, but I might have poured too much bourbon. Who knows? But thank you. This was so much fun.
Yeah,
Oh,
thanks
before
so
you go, if people want to follow you or listen to your podcast, where can they do that?
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram and Twitter at YFB Podcast. So YFB as in your favorite book. You can find me on all the major podcast streaming sites. So Google Podcast, Apple, Spotify. I'm just your favorite book. It'll pop right up there with a pink logo. And yeah, happy listening. If you like the show, I definitely appreciate, the reviews and things like that. That definitely helps your podcast out. I mean, I'm sure you all can speak to that. The reviews are great. And so yeah, that's where you can find me.
All right. There you have it. Go check her podcast out. It's really fun if you love books, or even if you don't, it's great discussion regardless.
yes.
Thank you.
And don't forget to leave a review. That's very important.
Also, Brown
For
Girls
sure.
Big Pod.
yes.
For sure.
Plug it in there.
Thanks,
All right.
Malvika.
Thanks, Malvika.
No
Cheers.
problem. Thank you. Cheers.